Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today I want to do another Plex Media Server test, and this one's going to be ever so slightly different to ones we've done before because this is utilising the Synology DS223, one of the newer generation value series NASes from Synology. Now, why is this going to be any different from any other tests we've done here on the channel? We've tested loads of Synology NASes, right? For Plex Media Server, I'm sure you've watched a couple of them. Well, this one has to be a little bit different because of this. You can see here on the left-hand side of the screen, that processor, the Realtek RTD1619B, that's right, I am a hoot at parties, is a, at least as far as Synology is concerned, relatively new CPU. And indeed, whether you are using Synology's platform or others, Plex hasn't released many or indeed any real clients for this processor. It is available in some, Android TV boxes and some streaming boxes, but those are very preset applications or indeed containers that have been created to run Plex on this architecture. This is a very efficient CPU. Now, what do I mean by efficient? It's an ARM based processor, which is designed around the idea that rather than rather more powerful CPUs that have got huge amounts of capabilities, ARM-based processors are typically designed for low power or battery-powered devices, your mobile phones, your Chromebooks, your portable devices. And this CPU, being part of that value series, is little different. It takes longer instructions that are delivered back and forth to the CPU, and those instructions are compressed in order for them to be actioned with a lower kind of impact power-wise. The result is that running a Plex Media Server on a more affordable NAS like this one, be it Synology or any other brand at all, is going to be a question of efficiency. But also, Plex has yet to release an official App Center supported version of Plex Media Server for this series. And indeed, if you're watching this and you're an owner of the DS423, at least at the time of recording, that is also true. And right now, if you do want to take advantage of Plex Media Server on this NAS, you have to go ahead and install Synology DS7.2, and then after that, you're going to need an application known as Container Manager. Container Manager will allow you to go ahead and install a containerified version of Plex Media Server. And again, we've already made a video to that. Hopefully that's linked in the description on how to install Plex on this NAS. We've already made a video and an article on that. So that is how we've managed to get Plex running on this system. As you can see, we're accessing the NAS locally on this system. We've already got all of our data that we always use in our tests. On the right hand side of the screen, we've got the performance measures there. And indeed, if we click this tab, we can see here, this is our NAS, and we're using the standard folders we always use for movies. We've got the music, we've got the TV shows, and of course, we've got our 4K and 1080p testing files as well. Now, if you watch my other Plex Media Server test NASes, you can skip forward again another minute or so. But before we go any further, it is worth talking a little bit about some slight differences between this video and other Plex Media Server tests I've performed. Now, normally, I would not utilize a client application to test Plex. I would run all of my Plex testing inside the web browser window. Now, why is that? Because I want to remove any kind of doubt that when we're looking at the results, that we're not overly reliant on a client application. Whether you're going to be utilizing a Plex client on a mobile device, a desktop device, comfort of your sofa or your home console, all of these client apps, that is the app you're going to be utilizing to watch your media, all are slightly different, with some of them supporting different compression techniques, some of them supporting different file formats, and often, depending on the hardware they're installed on, you'll have a very different user experience of your Plex NAS. Now, when it comes to accessing the Plex NAS server, that is where your data lives. With that system, you are kind of going to be bound by its own support, whether it is licensing, whether it is to do with file formats. And although your client application you might be using will override that in some cases, when it comes to if it can't override it and a file needs to be reshaped, that is to say, again, with compression or file sizes or file format, it can't be played, that's when the NAS uses hardware resources to transcode that job. Now, why am I bringing all this up? Well, because the CPU inside the DS223 and indeed DS423 are non-transcoding. There is a little bit of integrated graphics in their ARM-based architecture there, but not a lot. And what there is cannot really be used for Plex transcoding. So although native 4K playback, that is to say like-for-like Synology app and non-interference playback is possible, and indeed even over DLNA as well, when it comes to Plex Media Server, forget about using transcoding. So that's why for a rare occasion here, I'm not going to be using the web browser when I'm performance testing this NAS. I will be using the Windows application when normally I wouldn't do so. Now, just to give you a little bit of perspective there, here are some of the files that we're going to be testing later on, and we'll look at this one. This is a 100 megabits per second HEVC file, highly efficient video codec. And as we can see, it's playing it back natively. It's playing it back great. It is playing it over the local area network, which is again is another area where transcoding won't come in. But as you can see, it plays like an absolute dream in the client application there. However, if we go for the exact same file, because remember, look, CPU utilization isn't high. We go for the exact same file on this NAS, so 100 megabit HEVC. We play it there. We open it up here at the bottom. Have a look at the difference in that performance. It is still going to try and play it natively, but we're seeing that lag. You can probably even hear my laptop fans kicking up because it is still utilizing some local resources there. If we get the task manager up on screen, as we can see there, minimize it just a wee bit. So we got ourselves a new laptop we're using for these tests. But if we go to the resource monitoring there, and obviously Chrome's a bit of a greedy monster anyway, but as you can see, it's not playing back that far. That's because this is requiring that extra bit of oomph, and as you can see, it's kicked us out of the file, and there is that CPU utilization spiking quite a lot. So just do bear in mind that these tests today will be conducted using the client application rather than using the web browser like we normally would do. I'm going to take my watch off because it keeps tapping the table. So let's begin our tests. So first and foremost, we'll go right to the top here. We're going to start with some 1080p media. Normally by now, I would use the films, the movies that we've used before for 1080p and 720p. I'm not going to bother, one, because we're having real difficulty showing these on a lot of our YouTube videos without YouTube's copyright bots, regardless of monetization, just basically punishing the channel for using those. So I'm trying to err away from doing them and to provide an alternative, but we're going straight into the jellyfish files there. Now, the jellyfish files are a combination of the same 30 seconds of footage. What I mean by that, if we go to the file manager, we go into the jellyfish files. The jellyfish files are the same 30 seconds of a jellyfish. However, each version of them gets denser and denser and more complex, starting at just 10 megabytes and ending at 1.4 gigabytes for the same 30 seconds of footage. They just go from just a simple 3 megabits per second H.264 up to a staggering 400 megabits per second 4K Ultra HD HEVC 10-bit HDR file. An enormous difference there. We're not going to play them all. We're going to choose a select few. And then later in the video, what we're going to do is make our way over to some 4K media trailers. And we'll test a few of those just to test the output quality. We won't test them all, but we'll test several of them. So, heading back into that client. Again, we can go straight into probably the most bog standard easy one, a 3 megabits per second H.264 file there. And unsurprisingly, it's running absolutely fine there. You can see it on the right hand side, no dip there in terms of CPU utilization. Things are running absolutely fine there. Again, this is local area network. We're not doing remote, but let's say, and we'll go back into that file a little bit. Well, if we did want to do some of that transcoding just to prove a point, if we downgraded that to a 160p file, and that's taking this rather dense file and reshaping it into something much, much smaller, maybe you're only listening out for audio, maybe you're only enjoying this audio on a very limited internet connection or a much smaller device and you don't need some hefty file, like you've got a copy of Avatar in 4K that you want to downgrade to 480p, look at that CPU utilization there just for that 30 seconds of footage to downgrade it. Yes, it's a big jump down to 160p, but this is why we're not really going to be able to include much transcoding in this video. So, same file, but this time we're using the highly efficient video codec version. For those that aren't aware, HEVC, otherwise known as H.265, was a newer generation compression technique that was, unfortunately, its ownership is several companies and it requires licensing on some devices. So you may be using a client playback device that requires a license, and therefore you need to use transcoding to convert this into something that it can play there. But it seems fine. One day we'll get rid of that and go straight onto, you know, some of the newer generation X codecs, where we won't have to worry about this anymore. But for now, not codecs, compressions, or ramp it up to 10 megabits per second, and we're going to go straight back into HEVC as well. So again, immediate playback, playing in original quality, running absolutely fine. We're seeing it there, no problems whatsoever. It's able to play back this file, tiny little bump, but not really anything that much to write home about in terms of that CPU utilization. So now we'll ramp it up. We're going up to 30 megabits per second in HEVC file. Again, we're running the Linux server Plex 1 container installation on DSM 7.2 and Container Manager. We're playing it at that original quality. We are starting to see that CPU spike gets a little larger each time, but still more than manageable. And remember, 30 megabits per second is already getting quite hefty. Just to give you a bit of context on that, the majority of 1080p media you own, I would be massively surprised if it is in excess of 30 megabits per second. And it's only users that really take their media seriously where they start to utilize files like the ones we're about to test. So for example, 100 megabits per second in H.265 or HEVC, and once again, playing back fine. We're almost certainly going to see that spike getting a little bigger, but not too much bigger. It is going to be relative to everything we've seen thus far, but we're still seeing the caching, we're still seeing it play back. I'm still going to call this a success. Come out of that. Next up, now we're entering 4K territory. 4K, of course, much larger resolution there and definitely bigger files to play with. I believe this file is somewhere in the region of 500 to 700 megabytes, so an entire CD of data equivalent in 30 seconds, and we'll go for the 120 megabits per second HEVC 10-bit file there. So again, this is when we're getting into 4K, and we've already seen that drop in frame rate there. You can see that there. We're seeing a substantial dip in frame rate. Get used to seeing that at this level. Now again, my PC, as you can see here, PC is working hard, but it's not working that hard. There's a bit of memory there getting ramped up, but even then, it's still not end of the world. There isn't too much of a bottleneck, and even if you look at RAM utilization of the NAS, the RAM's utilization isn't so bad. So overall, it's played the file, but I'm not going to say it was done flawlessly. Next up, 200 megabits per second using the client application there. We'll play that. And again, bear in mind, this is where things are getting even heavier. So we're seeing that drop in frame rate once again. We're seeing it hang. This is a very hefty file. Now, again, I'll refer you back to my disclaimer earlier on. When I was talking about previous tests, there's going to be some of you watching this going, wait, that file didn't play on much more powerful NASs that you've tested on your Plex Media Server videos. And you're right. That's because I was using the web browser to play them, because I wanted to give that system that had transcoding the option of utilizing it for users that need to know. Whereas in the context of this video, because we're using the local client that has an HEVC license, it's not going to need that transcoding. This is the equivalent of playing that file natively in the web browser, but we're doing it locally on the client, thanks to the support of H.265 on this local system. Very important. And then finally, the largest file, the 400 megabits per second 10-bit one. And again, we're seeing that hang, we're seeing that tremendous drop in frame rate. Again, some of this can be the client, some of this can be the local server system there on the side, but not so much so. But still, nonetheless, we're still outputting it there. We're seeing the utilization locally get quite high, but still not end of the world high. But just bear in mind, we are quite badly taxing some of the resources on either side. These are still great results. And again, just for context, because again, I'm not going to call this a successful playback, but just to give you a little bit of contextual comparison there. Once again, if we go back into this NAS and go down to that 400 megabits per second file, but this time try to play it locally in the web browser like I have shown in previous videos, we're able to see that even though it's trying to play it, it really is struggling quite badly. And that's what I mean about the client device you're dealing with, how much heavy load they are able to take on with regards to some of those compressions and some of the formats, but also to do with how much it needs to in the first place, depending on the client app you use. But again, that's not going to play, and it's only going to kick us out. We're seeing that CPU spike on and off. So next, we're going to go to the 4K trailers. Once again, we're not going to play all of them. That's really not what we're trying to do. We're just trying to give you an overview of how this performs in certain file formats and types. So we go to the library, list them here, detailed view, and we're going to use some of the tester files. So this one should be fine. This is an H.264 12 megabits per second. So this is way lower than a lot of the things we've seen thus far. Again, we're seeing it play through. Let's do a skip ahead, see how that's doing there. Again, this is quite a dark file. It can be super annoying, this one, but still nonetheless, it's playing it there. And the CPU, although we are, of course, seeing that CPU spike going up to 40-odd%, it's still not end of the world bad. So I would call that a success, but not an absolute stormer. Now, this file here is quite hefty. It's an HEVC file here at 60 megabits per second, and it's 4K Ultra HD, known as roast duck. I think it's 45 seconds long. And ultimately, this is one of those files that really sets the men from the boys. But for now, we've seen the buffering there take place instantly. We're seeing it being played back natively there. We're seeing no real slowdown. We're seeing a small spike there on the right, but not really anything to be concerned with overall. And it's playing it absolutely fine there. And we've got all of the colors. We've got the frame rate. It's running fine. Just again, for a basis of comparison, let's play that same file natively in the web browser. Open that up there. And as you can see, we've now had to convert the file there on that web browser due to some of the compatibility hurdles that we've just discussed. As you can see, we're not really moving forward at all. The CPU has gone absolutely bananas, and just another example of why transcoding is completely off the table in the new value series releases from Synology with this CPU. And even the memory there was starting to get oversaturated too. So we'll head back into the Plex thing. We'll go for this next test, H.265, and it's 30 megabits per second. This one, what's this called? The Beauty of Taiwan. We can go with on there, playing in original quality. We've still got the original frame rate. Let's skip forward and get the CPU to have to recache there in the background. We'll try and really push the system a little bit, but it's still running absolutely fine. And again, using natively H.265 supported client applications will ensure this level of smoothness. Again, within the client though, say you wanted to downgrade this 4K file to perhaps even just 1080p, which isn't too much of a dip, we're able to see here just that freeze there, and just transcoding once again. It'll give it a bloody good go. Look at that CPU spike, and it's trying, it's really trying, but with no buffering there and just an absolute halt. It's once again just another example of why transcoding on this is just not going to be a smooth experience. Now, there may be some of you watching this wondering, well, why don't you just go into the transcoder options, and we mentioned this earlier on, and set the transcoder to make my CPU hurt? And let's do exactly that. Let's save those changes, and now we're going to use the Plex settings to push the system to go for that transcoding. So let's play that exact same file here again in the client. We can skip forward within the client. Let's bring our performance measures back on screen. Roll down. Look at the utilization of that CPU. We've got some of the file cached there. Let's rewind ever so slightly. And this time we're going to action that transcoding that we just mentioned. So once again, we'll go down to 1080p, 8 megabits per second. And this time we've utilized the option on the NAS, or on the Plex settings on the NAS, to make my CPU hurt. And we're seeing not dissimilar results to what we've seen before. So once again, configuration settings towards transcoding on this with this CPU are just not viable, and I include whether you're using lower end, and it did play it, but it was stopped after a second. So let's test just a few more files towards the end. But ultimately, between all of these test files that we've done thus far, we're not really seeing anything really meaningful in terms of that performance. I mean, again, if we go into movies, we've got those options for 720p and 1080p, not really much to write home about. And if we go back to the Jellyfish files, we play that original file there with make my CPU hurt, go for it there, and it's playing in that original quality. We'll downgrade that down, perhaps down to 720p at 2 megabits per second. Much easier file management handling there. That CPU is just going to see an absolute cliff face in terms of capability there. Ultimately, I think the one big takeaway from these Plex Media Server tests today is going to simply be, I hate seagulls, that unless you need to use transcoding, the DS223 and indeed the DS423 are going to be good enough NASs to enjoy for Plex Media Server. And yes, there isn't an application right now. We're overly reliant on the client app because there's still yet to be an application at the time of recording for Plex Media Server for the Synology and Realtek RTD 1619B processor. So if you want to use local and you're not going to be using transcoding and you haven't got to worry about things with H.265, this is still a reasonable NAS for that. But if you think you're going to need transcoding, or your client devices are going to need some kind of manipulation of the files, be they for bandwidth, weight, or compatibility reasons, then this may not be the NAS for you. But as an affordable Plex NAS, this isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. And the last thing I will add, once again, is we're going to be changing the way we're doing our Plex Media Server testing here on the channel, as we've really been hitting something of an issue with regards to testing files that have copyright online. Even if we don't monetize the videos, we're just getting into too much difficulty making them. So at the moment, we're just creating some new test regimens in the background. And until that's done, we're going to be relying on the Jellyfish files and some of these non-media movie trailers and stuff like that. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, whether you want to see other Plex NASs or other tests you want to see on this NAS while we've got this set up. Hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, there's links in the description to reviews and before you buys on this NAS, as well as other Plex guides that you can check out too. Click subscribe if you want to stay abreast of these. Click like if you've enjoyed the video. It really helps us out. Plus, we've got the free advice section, the free community support forum, the Discord, and we've even got the free advice section and lots of other means which me and Eddie, it's just us here at NAS Compares, can help you out to choose the right NAS for your Plex Media Server collection. Also, if you found this video helpful, and if you were going to shop at any one of Amazon, Newegg, B&H, any of those sort of Walmart, if you're going to shop at those shops, use the links in the description to take you there. It costs you nothing extra, and anything you buy results in a kickback coming to here at the channel. It's just me and Eddie, and it allows us to keep doing what we do. But just bear in mind, only do that if you found this video helpful. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.